I read Wild Seed by Octavia Butler. This is part of the Patternist series, and I've read this book before. In fact, I've done a podcast about it before. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But the way that I'm reading this book is as part of the series and as the final book in the series because of the way that the series was published. And so this would be kind of the last prequel that was written to the first book in the series, Pattern Master. Therefore, I'm going to be talking about connections between all four of the books. And so if you don't want to be spoiled for the entire series, then you shouldn't listen to this. Okay, so Wild Seed takes place the furthest back in time. We go back to kind of pre-colonial times for America. The book starts in Africa, where Doro and Anyanwu, who are the main characters of the book, meet each other for the first time in Anyanwu's house. And Anyanwu, we find out later, is Emma from Mind of My Mind. But I think this book kind of explains the ways in which, basically, I think of it as the story of Anyanwu being broken under Doro's domination. And whatever humanity Doro has being revealed in the book, but I don't find much redemption for Doro's character overall. To me, the revelation of what humanity he has makes him more monstrous to me, which is interesting because Anyanwu herself is something of a monster in the sense that, like, when we meet her here at the beginning, she's a person who is revered as a powerful spiritual leader by her people, maybe a god, certainly good luck for her people. And that's because she has the ability to shapeshift into various animals, various forms of herself across a lifetime. So she can be an old woman, a young woman, everything in between. And she can create all kinds of cures for people, many of them from her body itself. And so this immediately, I think, kind of plugs into the theme that Butler has been using since Pattern Master, of having the one character who is concerned with the relation of power over here in Doro, and the other character who is the healer and is concerned with empathy over here in the form of Anyanwu. And so in Pattern Master, we had those two characters were the main characters, and it exclusively focused on the man and not the healer. But I think Anyanwu feels like the main character of this book to me, but I guess they are kind of each other's antagonists in the story, if you look at it that way. It's a story about a fight between both of them, and we see perspectives from both of them. And I think the energies between them are what manifest that patternist society eventually. And I do think that that is a really essential thing to keep in the back of your mind when you're reading Wild Seed, that whatever happens in this book, it's all leading to that kind of supremacist dystopian future of the Pattern Master. So Doro and Anyanwu meet at her house, and Doro explains that he has psychic powers that allow him to move from body to body, and that he can tell she is different, and convinces her to come away with him because he has been trying to breed a race of people who have special powers like the two of them. And his goal is to have people who can live forever, just like her and just like him. And Anyanwu wants children that she doesn't have to watch grow old and then die, and she buries them. She wants a family that will last forever, basically. And so because of that promise and because of her curiosity, she goes with him. And quickly we find out that Doro does commerce with the slave traders who are in the area, which is part of the reason why he was there. An entire village of his got wiped out, and then because of that, he was able to sense Anyanwu from a distance, where I guess her presence would have been hidden by all of the psychic potentials who would have been in the village. She just would have, mixed in with all of those other people, and he wouldn't have been able to pick her out. I think there is something interesting to note, like right off the bat about that Doro makes this claim that he's kind of this master breeder, that he is creating this society of special people. But the thing is, he doesn't protect his people very well. He leaves for a long time. He comes back. He doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't care about the personal suffering of any of his people. And also, you had somebody who is extremely special in Anyanwu who he had no idea existed. And at this point in the story, she's 300 or 400 years old. So he really, if he's such a master, how did he miss that? Right. And I think that's something that we're supposed to think about. And the incredible power that Anyanwu has is the kind of thing that Doro spends the rest of the book trying to recreate. If for hundreds of years, he tries to recreate Anyanwu, and he's not able to do it. But the way that it did happen was totally by accident and might not have had anything to actually do with him. So there's good reason to doubt his claim in the first place. He might not be as good at this as he wants to believe he is. And so Doro hooks up with his slave trader allies, which he's using to transport people across the ocean to North America, and secures his ship with his special group of people on there. And they're going to go to New York, basically, which I think at this point it would be New Amsterdam, but maybe not. They call it New York. I don't know. In any case, there's a lot of Dutch people there, which is what makes me think of it as New Amsterdam. And one of his special people, who he calls his son, is Isaac, who's on the ship. And Isaac is immediately drawn to Anyanwu. He's very attracted to her. And this brings up confusing feelings for Anyanwu because she considers herself to be married to Doro, to be in partnership with him, and this is Doro's son, and so that would be some kind of incest or forbidden in any way. Since she's married, she's monogamous. But this is kind of the beginning of breaking down Anyanwu's sense of propriety and her boundaries as a person. This is what Doro is going to do for the entire book, is kind of erode her boundaries and get her to change as a person. And Isaac is kind of the first step in that. So what we find out is that the ship itself is kind of driven by Isaac because he's a very powerful psychic who has kind of a telekinesis power where he is able to push the entire ship through the ocean and make it move much faster than a sailing ship should be able to go. And while they're out at sea, he also catches fish for them, just pulls them right up out of the ocean and onto the deck. And then, the crew is able to kill them and butcher them for dinner. And one time he brings up some dolphin and they have that for dinner. And Anyanwu eats some of it raw, which allows her to analyze its DNA. And then she's able to restructure her entire body to become a dolphin. And she goes into the ocean and she finds other dolphins and swims with them. And we get Doro's perspective when this happens. And we find out that he is not able to sense her anymore. And that this would be a way for her to escape him. Which I think this is really significant kind of symbolically, because Doro is kind of a type of patriarchal leader, an embodiment of the patriarchy almost. And part of the entire raison d'etre for the patriarchy is to control people's bodies, women's bodies, their reproduction, men's bodies too, and to enforce gender sexual norms for the purpose of reproducing the patriarchy. Like you want to create families that create more babies that perpetuate the patriarchy, in other words. And so this freedom that Anyanwu has is kind of intolerable to Doro, where she has full control over her body to the point where she is not fully limited by a human form. She participates in animal forms as well. And so this puts her outside of the norms of womanhood as he defines it, as is useful to him for his breeding project. This is the main thing that Dora is all about, is breeding humans to create nations that will serve his goals. And Anyanwu becoming an animal just sits outside of that entire thing. It's a type of personal freedom that infuriates him because it just doesn't cohere to his plans at all. And in the story, I think it symbolically is about her freedom, because it's going to happen again and again and again, but it's also going to stop eventually. And I think that symbolizes a stop to her personal liberty and a buying into of her role in the patriarchy. But anyway, she transforms into the dolphin, but then she transforms back and she goes back on the ship and everything, and they complete the trip to America. And she's, forced to wear different clothes. She's forced to try different foods. And Doro explains to her that he is going to leave and she's going to marry Isaac and create a family with him and raise kids. And she is very upset about this, angry, humiliated. And Doro says, like, if you won't do it, then I'm going to go back to Africa and find all of your children and your grandchildren, and I'm going to enslave all of them and make them a part of my project, which I'm sure he did anyway. Like, I'm sure that did definitely happen and had, nothing to do with him keeping his word to Anyanwu, because this is who Doro is. He's a dictator, he is manipulative, and he's a supremacist. He doesn't allow anybody to be more powerful than him in any relationship, which I think is one half of what we see in the Pattern Master and how the pattern works. And especially in Mind of My Mind, I talked about how that very vertical power structure and everybody is either a master or a slave. There's nobody who's kind of has lateral positions to each other. It's the same thing with Doro. There's nobody who is his equal. There is nobody who is like him or that he trusts completely. Everybody is his slave, his servant. Even Isaac, who is one of his favorite people, his favored son, I think the degree to which he relaxes and allows Isaac to speak his mind only has to do with the fact that Isaac is so loyal to him and would never betray him. It's not down to a deep human affection or vulnerability on Doro's part. I think the first thing it does is serve his need for loyalty, and everything else comes second in that relationship. Despite her being distraught over being ordered to marry Isaac, eventually she agrees, and Doro leaves the colony, the village, whatever, and we find out that Anyanwu and Isaac get along really well, and they actually make for a pretty happy marriage. And Anyanwu kind of lets herself age with him and tries her best to take care of him and be a part of the community and give him good children and just basically like kind of assimilate into this North American colony. And this brings back for me the whole thing that I was talking about with the American project and the relation that this patternist story has to America, the promise that Doro makes to Anyanwu about a kind of utopia of people who will never grow old and die, people who are special just like him and her, and how all of that's going to be located in America. And meanwhile, like right from the start, there's these whole things about, race difference, about freedom and slavery, how it's not safe for Anyanwu to go out without a white person near her because her freedom is going to be questioned. While there are some Black people who are free, they have to constantly prove their freedom. And that's happening, before the establishment of America. It's already there in the culture. And I think that's significant because we know how the American project collapses by the time that we're getting to Clay's arc and how it's just completely vanished by the time that Pattern Master has happened. And in a way, this entire patternist society is an evolution of the American project. It exists in the context of America. And I think it's symbolic of the American project in the ways that I've been saying. And so Butler doesn't romanticize the past of, the American roots or anything, making it about a project of personal liberty and gaining wealth and on like that. There's white supremacy from the beginning. There's the oppression of Black people right from the beginning. There's the importation of slaves who are massively suffering. And even Anyanwu's passage across the ocean is a type of a version of that whole thing. And I think it's significant also that Doro kind of like pulled the rug out from under her after she crossed the entire ocean and got to this continent and had her make friends with various people and start to strike up a friendship with Isaac. There's a way in which she is captured by the community, made vulnerable by caring about other people in ways that Doro doesn't. That's the way that Doro controls her, is via her connections to other people and the way that she builds community around her. And so, like I talked about in Mind of My Mind, the ways that the American project built communities who cared about each other was kind of just another form, another tool for supremacist forces to use against those very people. So Doro uses her connection to her family and her love for her community against her to hold her in the place that he wants her to be and forces her to do the things that he needs her to do. And so Anyanwu and Isaac have had kids, but now they have a girl who is getting around the time of her transition, which we saw a lot of in Mind of My Mind. And this girl in Weke is going to be very, very powerful. Doro can sense it. And he wants them to be very careful in how they bring her through. And over the years, again and again, Anyanwu has defied Doro and gotten him to the point where he's not interested in keeping her around anymore. He feels like she is too defiant. She's not worth the trouble of keeping her around. And he plans to, after Nweke is successfully brought through this transition, he's going to possess Anyanwu's body and basically kill her. And Isaac pleads with him to not do this, not for only for his sake because he loves Anyanwu, but because he feels, because he loves Doro, basically. He sees Doro as his father, and he says to him that this is a person who could be a companion to you through time and could give you a kind of human connection that you have closed yourself off to because it was impossible for you to have it. So the wanting of it was too painful, but now the opportunity is here and you have to become softer and more vulnerable and open up to it because it's something that you really need. And if he loses that ability to connect in that way, Isaac feels that Doro will become like kind of fully monstrous and maybe kind of, go insane and become something truly evil in the world. And he doesn't want that for the sake of his father. It's not just that he's scared that this would happen and it would create a bad future for his people. I think he's scared on Doro's behalf for his own sake because he loves him. And so there's an idea here that Doro is sick and that Anyanwu is the cure, that her capacity as a healer is what is going to be a deciding factor in fixing Doro, this broken part of his personality. Doro is ambivalent about it. He's like, whatever, we'll see how it goes. But it seems to me that he just fully plans to kill Anyanwu. But then Enwiki's transition happens. It goes poorly, and she comes out of it in a kind of psychotic episode, or it seems like her entire personality is gone for some reason, and instead she's just kind of like a animal that has very strong telekinetic powers that can affect people inside their body. And so she reminds me a lot of Amber from the Pattern Master in terms of her abilities, but it's as if all of the empathy, insanity of that character had been stripped out, and she just viciously attacks Anyanwu, who attacks her back, and then Isaac gets involved, and they end up killing each other, essentially. And so Isaac kills her, but she also hurts him, and they both die. And so Anyanwu loses Isaac and her daughter, and Doro loses basically the healer that he felt like would be the replacement to Anyanwu, and he lost his favorite son. And this enrages him, and Anyanwu runs away and becomes an animal, and so Doro's not able to track her, and this infuriates him, and there's kind of like a closing of that part of the book, and it goes into like part 2. So there's a big time skip that is like more than 100 years or something. And in that time, Anyanwu went to Louisiana and she got a plantation that she owns by herself. And she's basically like created a tiny community of freed slaves, but it's a secret that they're freed. She changes her body to be in the body of a white man, which kind of like gives them permission to have this place. And then she goes out and she will buy slaves in order to free them every once in a while. But mostly she is cultivating a community of people who have psychic powers because she feels this very strong need to be close to her community. And to me, I feel like this is the other half of the pattern for the entire patternist society that will evolve in Mind of My Mind and Pattern Master, that there is a strong need that happens in Mind of My Mind when they make the pattern to be in the same house, in the same area, to be like physically close to each other. And I feel like that comes from Anyanwu. She has this need to be close to people who are like her in her community, be close to her family, even though it creates some certain problems with people who can hear each other's thoughts or feel the emotions of other people. And they have a hard time with their children. And all of that stuff is like explored in Mind of My Mind, and all of it's here as well. But nonetheless, they get like a deeper comfort from it than they do all of the discomforts. And again, I think this goes back to this theme that I keep talking about of the relationship between the body and the mind, and the way that the body is the origin of dispositions in people, that the body requires Anyanwu to be near other people who have the same powers that she does. And so she follows that impulse and creates these communities. And she tends to stay with them, stay in one place. Doro doesn't do that. He goes from place to place to place. And her people like to stay with each other. They do better when they stay with each other, even though there is this dysfunction that happens with the children. And when we pick it back up, we're from Doro's perspective, and he finds the plantation and goes in there, and he sees a young man who has like tiny little arms, and come to find out that he is regrowing them in the way that Anyanwu is able to change her body. And if she like lost a limb or something, she could regrow it. That's what he's doing. Only it's taking him, months instead of the way that Anyanwu could do it in moments. And so once again, Doro tried to recreate Anyanwu, and he created in Wiki and failed fundamentally. But Anyanwu has successfully created more powerful people than he ever did. And so it calls into question, to what degree is he really the master of doing this stuff that he claims to be? And also calls into question, like the competency of the patriarchy, and where do the actual successes of the patriarchy emanate from? The necessity and support and competence of women and other communities that exist on the periphery of patriarchy, people of color, queer people, on and on like that, who have to strive harder and work harder than people who sit within the circle of privilege, and therefore don't have to try as hard, tend to do the heavy lifting, if you will, within patriarchy. I think they're better at whatever they're doing because they have to work harder to earn even less than people who, have half their skill. And so Anyanwu needed to create a community because that's what her body needs her to do. And she needed to do it quietly and secretly to try and stay away from Doro as long as possible. And in doing that, in staying in the community and managing it and helping it to flourish, it created something more interesting in terms of what Doro wants than anything that he created by going from place to place and not really managing much of anything. Doro's happy as long as people obey him, but that's about the only result that he's really good at getting. And so there's just kind of like an encoded incompetence, I think, that Butler is revealing about patriarchal management systems of people. They require constant pressure from Doro to obey. And that's like the main thing that he does. Everything else is, he says that's what he's doing, but the main thing that he does is just put pressure on people to obey him. And he's not even that great at that. Like, people don't really love him or anything. They just obey him out of terror. So he sees her community. He sees how successful she's been. He decides that he's not going to kill her. And he asks if he can bring some people there who are her descendants. And she feels like she can't stop him, that it's too late. And I think this is a point in the story where resignation starts to dig in for her, because she feels like she's never going to be able to run away from Doro successfully. Wherever she goes in the world, he'll be able to find her eventually, because she's going to need to build a community. She's going to need other people like her. And so that's just going to call out to him at some point. And the fact that she defied him is going, it makes it a vendetta for him. He's going to hunt her. And so she just resigned to I guess bring whoever here because what am I going to do? And he brings this guy to the colony and it goes really terribly. It's like in Weke all over again. A bunch of people that she loves die because of this. And then she is forced to kill this person. And that makes her really upset because, she's a healer. She's not a killer. Although she's willing to defend her community and defend herself, this isn't how she wants it to be. And Doro is kind of mortified by this. He didn't expect this outcome to happen. And he tries to apologize about the whole thing and get her to understand. But again, I feel like she's just more resigned than understanding. And even though things are good between them for a while, there's a little bit of a honeymoon period and an understanding that builds between them. Doro tries more and more to accommodate her, to respect her. And he does this for her own sake, not just for using her community for genetic fodder in his program, but to cultivate a real relationship with her the way that Isaac wanted him to. And he kind of starts to agree with the things that Isaac said. But at the end of this brief kind of honeymoon period, he ends up taking the life of one of the people that Anyanwu cares about a lot because he needs to eat. He needs sustenance, and the psychic people of her community are good food for him. And so he takes her body, and this fully shuts off something in Anyanwu where, again, she feels like she's never going to be able to get away from him. And so the only path of resistance that's left to her is to kill herself. So she's going to use her ability to change her body from the inside to end her own life, basically. And this is really upsetting to Doro. There's kind of nothing that he can do about it because the choice for him in that case is either to allow her to kill herself, which he doesn't want to have happen, or to take her body himself to kill her himself, which he would also lose her if he did that. And so she's put him in a situation that no one else has been able to do for a long time of he has no choice, but, whatever. She's the one with the power and not him. She is taking control from him. But in a way, he is also one in terms of she's not fighting back against him anymore. This isn't an act of defiance on her part, I guess is what I mean. It's a kind of nihilism. It's a kind of depression. She's not resisting Doro. It's just the only path out from all this pain. He's not delivering the immortal children that he promised to her, and he's not allowing her to build the community that she wants and to have the freedom and space that she needs. He's just not respecting her as a person or any of her people as people. Everyone is a thing to him, and she can't take it anymore. And there's this striking part that reminds me of another scene. I think it's a deliberate repetition of a scene from Mind of My Mind where Mary and her husband, through the pattern, kind of do this spiritual lovemaking, this mingling of selves along the lines of the pattern. They kind of open to each other psychically, and then Mary draws his power to her, but does not fully take it away from him. And then they kind of mingle together, like I said. And this happens with Doro and Inyanwu. He asks her to trust him, to submit to him, and to do this thing with him. And it's as if the thing that I always think of is a predator, like a lion or something, opening its mouth wide and her putting her head in there. And that's kind of what this is, which sounds really weird. I think it's supposed to be way more spiritual than that, that their minds or their essence, their soul is kind of interpenetrating with each other and becoming a kind of one thing. And she finds it really, really amazing. But at the same time, it's really scary because he doesn't fully pull back and he starts to draw her power away. But then at the last second, he lets her go. And in that moment where he fully, is around her and could destroy her, could consume her essence and take over her body, and she doesn't know his intentions. She just thinks to herself, it doesn't matter. He could just take me. I don't care anymore. And that to me is kind of the final foreclosure of Anyanwu's personality of it's like the final wearing away. At the beginning of the story, she would never have created the kind of community that he does. She never would have allowed the kind of inbreeding to happen that happens in that community to create those people. She never would have, at one point she talks about how she changed her gender and took a wife, or her sex, I guess, and took a wife and had babies, made babies with her. And that was a thing that she said was an abomination. And her diet and all these boundaries that helped to create the person who she was are kind of exploded out. And by the end, even the boundary of her personhood is, in this moment of mingling with Doro, is kind of like washed away. Like there's no more boundary between her and Doro. They become one entity briefly. And in that moment, she fully submits and resigns herself to being food for him, for being whatever it is that he wants her to be, and gives up. And so I think that's like the final barrier. And he explains to her that, oh, I love you and I'll do this for you and I'll do that for you afterwards. But for me, it's her. She's been fully assimilated into his program, and she's kind of like joined this patriarchal project from this point on, because the Emma that we see in Mind of My Mind, while she has some independence and some fire to her, is on board with what Doro is doing. And if you remember at the beginning of that story, she talks to, like, Mary comes into the house and says, like, they're like, why do you look like that? You look all messed up. What's going on? And she's like, I had to beat up a guy because he was going to rape me. And they're like, what's wrong with you? Like, why don't you calm down? Why don't you not beat people up? And the Anyanwu in this story, when someone tries to rape one of her grandchildren, kills the guy who did that. So she's a different person, is what I'm saying in Mind of My Mind. And she even has a different name, Emma. And as much as I love Anyanwu as a character, I think there's a kind of misunderstanding that I've seen in people's interpretation of this, that she's like a strong female character and empowerment and all this kind of thing. And she is a great character, but this is a story about how she is broken. And when the story carries on in Mind of My Mind, she is not merely complicit in Doro's plans the way she is at the end of this story. She's fully a part of his project. And I think, like I said, even genetically, her bodily disposition of needing people to be close is a fundamental part of what the pattern is and how it operates in the future to be, it shrinks the geography of what's left of America, once the Clayark plague happens. And I think it also defines a kind of boundary between the different people groups of the Patternists on the inside and the Clayarkers on the outside, and these two different races. And that proximity that's required by her part of the genetics is a fundamental part of that. And then the other half of it is, Doro's disposition of slave mastery and power dynamics is the other half of the patternist society. So it's the two of them together that encode and create the basis for what is going to happen, all the way in that distant future. And this is, the two of them together are building the master race. And even though she's not fully comfortable with it, she is fully participating in it because in her mind, there's no way out. There's no point in resistance. He's completely broken down all of her boundaries. And so every time I read the book these days, it makes me really sad. Like I cry at the end. That moment where he holds her in his power and could drain her and she gives up is so tragic to me. And even though I think they have a genuine love for each other and a real human need, like I said, that Doro has for her and a vulnerability that she brings out in him, to me, he's all the more monstrous because of his humanity and which means that he makes these monstrous choices despite his human emotions, and he chooses to repress his empathy, because it's the only way that he can kind of psychologically cope with his need to kill. He doesn't have a choice about killing. And so it makes sense to me, but at the same time, I don't give him a pass for it. It could be different. And that is the thing that Anyanwu keeps holding out to him again and again and again. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. You could make different choices. You could think of it differently. And that is the same thing that's held out all the way in Pattern Master, that, there is some kind of alternative way to live than this patriarchal master-slave relationship kind of society, but these men are not interested in pursuing that path. And again, the healer women are instrumentalized for the benefit of the pattern, for the benefit of the breeding project, for the patriarchy, rather than listened to and given freedom. And I think all of that is a commentary that Butler's making on our society and trying to get us to think about, even the good community, quote unquote, that Anyanwu builds in Louisiana before Doro gets there is a kind of broken utopia. And this, this little island of freedom surrounded by extremely dangerous white supremacist society that would rip it apart if they knew it existed, feels a lot to me like the broken society that exists in Clay's arc and is starting to manifest in Mind of My Mind. And the compromises and the failures on, the compromises that Anyanwu makes and the failures that Doro makes again and again are all symbolic too of the state of the American project, in Butler's metaphor, I think. So it's not as didactic as what I'm making it sound like, but I've read the series so many times that I see all kinds of multifaceted parallels, and it's on my mind a lot these days when I read it and see a lot of the things that Butler warned about manifesting in our society, the oppression of people because of the color of their skin and the ways that we kind of thought maybe we were getting past all of that, and maybe the ways that it's not possible to get past those things and retain the American identity because it was in the very roots of the whole thing before America was America, the way that she points out in this book, the way that it was right there in New York when Anyanwu landed in that community. And so I think this whole series just kind of defies a lot of genre conventions. It's very tragic in its tone. it's not just dystopian, like in the sense of you could read Pattern Master and as like, oh, it's a dystopian society and the leader gets overthrown by the hero of the story. And so a new order can emerge and everything's going to be better. But I'm really doubtful of that. Like, it seems like it's going to be the same thing all over again, just with a different guy. And there's not a lot of reasons in that story to believe there's going to be a happily ever after type of ending. And none of these books have that. All of them have a sense of the human spirit kind of fighting against these larger systems and forces that are both inside and outside of us, these cultural pressures, biological pressures, and kind of the beauty and bravery of the human spirit in the face of those things is all the more beautiful because every time it fails. And so I love the poignancy of that, but it is also like very pessimistic. And that's just the tone of the Patternist series. It's not optimistic about our future. It's not optimistic about our capacity to resist and to create change, either in our own bodies or in our wider society. But despite that tragedy and sadness that's in the story, there's so much beauty as well, and also all of the utopian ideas and the hope and the real connections that happen to people all along the way. And so Butler's a real master at weaving together, these contrasting elements of human experience that while everything will not turn out great in the end, there are beautiful moments along the journey that I don't know if they necessarily make it worth it, but they're not worthless in themselves.